Hello from Clarksville, Maryland and St. Louis Church. My name is Pat Sprankle, and I'm a member of the NACYML leadership team and Director of Youth Ministry here at the church. It's great to have participants here from all over the United States and from 6 continents. I want to welcome our panel for today. We have Ella Milewska, Frank Mercadante, Pat Finan, and Robbie Anderson, as well as Joe Wires, who's going to be our facilitator of the chat rooms. It is good to have you all here. We welcome you to the 3rd week of the MOOC, addressing Pope Francis's Evangelii Gaudium. This week's theme is Encounter as the Call to Spiritual Accompaniment and Being Heralds of the Word. Our master teacher, Bob Rice, has stated that that's the longest title and therefore the most important. So you're at the right place. Just a logistic before we begin this session with prayer. I'm finding the chat messages from participants over the last 2 weeks as a very insightful and powerful source of learning. Unfortunately, the panel here and I cannot see those messages as you send them, but we will be continuing to receive summaries from our chat facilitator, Joe, as the session continues. And as Joe leads us in prayer, I ask personally that you remember all those affected by injustice and violence, not only here in Baltimore, but in far too many other places. Now I ask Joe to lead us in prayer.
Thank you, Pat. Let us remember today everything that's happening, especially in Baltimore, in Nepal, and everywhere else that needs our prayers. And so we pray, God of our journey, as you walked with the disciples on the road to Emmaus, walk with us during this learning experience. May we encounter you in the listening and the learning, in the sharing and the silence, and in your body gathered in so many places and times. We pray this through Christ our Lord. Amen. And Father, Son, and Spirit. Amen.
Thanks, Joe. We have an incredible panel for this session, and I ask that they introduce themselves and their titles. Let's begin with Ella.
Hi, I'm Ella Milewska. I am an adjunct staff with Cultivation Ministries and also the project coordinator of the National Initiative on Adolescent Catechesis, and I'm glad to be here.
Thanks, Ella. Frank?
Hi, I'm Frank Mercadante. I'm Executive Director of Cultivation Ministries. I was a youth minister for 10 years, married, and six children. Thanks.
Thanks, Frank. Pat?
Sorry. I'm Pat Finan. I'm a content passioneer with St. Mary's Press, which means I get to create and edit some really cool digital and print resources. Longtime diocesan and parish faith formation and youth ministry leader. And I'm married and have 3 kids, ages 15 to 20.
Thank you. And Robbie?
For that, I had been a coordinator of youth ministry, parish youth ministry, for about 20 years. I'm also the NACYML representative for the best region in the nation. That would be Region 7. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, here it begins now. So one of the reflections that I find intriguing from Bob Rice is that we're called first to be heralds of the Word, speaking the truths of the gospel clearly and joyfully to young people. And then, as Pope Francis says, removing sandals before the sacred ground of other people. I think this is the tension between what we've heard before, talking the truth talk of our faith coherently and lovingly, and walking the sacred walk with the young people. Panel, what most resonated with you or struck you as you listened to Bob Rice share his thoughts? And why don't we begin with Ella again?
Sure. I think the part that really struck me with Bob Rice's video is that the constant reminder of who this is all about, that this ministry, everything we do, is about Jesus and drawing young people and all people to the heart of Christ.
Thank you. Pat?
What struck me most about Bob's comments are when he was talking about why the Word became flesh, especially to call us, if I can paraphrase this, beyond simply the thou shalt nots of the commandments to the blessed are yous of the Beatitudes, and also just reflecting on what Pope Francis says about what I would call relational ministry and encountering young people where they're at. I used to take some joy in the challenge of meeting Christ in places like juvenile detention facilities or tragic family relationships or in shopping malls where youth are being lured by consumerism. And now, reflecting on what Bob shared, I am especially intrigued about meeting young people in social media and some of the challenges that create, which I'm sure we can talk about later. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Frank?
So much of what Bob said was amazing, but I would also echo with Pat. I was struck by his comments on why the Word became flesh. I really believe that the primary influence and model for all evangelization really has to be founded in the incarnation, especially in a postmodern age where we need things concretized and where young people need an experience of God. I think if the Word became flesh, because I think sometimes words just aren't enough, that we need a experiential encounter, which this whole thing is about, and move away from kind of a drive-by approach. And I think that's true. Something else that he said, just bringing people into the sacramental life of the church and how much the church really has to become a community and not just a gathering place. And those are things that really struck me.
Thank you. I find that, especially during this Easter season, I'm very much aware that the Gospels have a lot to do with Jesus, though risen, continuing that encounter with other people in Emmaus and Thomas and just so many other places that we are called to do as well, no matter where we go. Robbie?
Hi, I too had the Word became flesh and incarnate, and I really kind of focus a little bit more on the fleshiness of it. I also like the quote, "Let everyone admire how you care for one another and how you encourage and accompany one another." And I feel that sometimes our heads in the sand, or maybe is it quicksand, of how we do our programs. Are we so concerned about methods that we fail to really live the message and see other people living the message? We're more concerned about structure. And after reading The Joy of the Gospel and the Church of Mercy, I'm always asking myself, okay, are we the Church of Mercy? Are we a missionary church? Also, that leads me to think, okay, well, what do we really want this to look like? I think we question what it looks like, but what is this changing church that we are looking for going to look like? What do we want it to be?
Thank you very much. Joe, do you want to go to one of your comments from the chat room? Adam from Mobile.
Yeah, Adam from Mobile asks, how do we shift from customer satisfaction to catechesis with everything that we do?
It's a great question. Pam, would one of you like to begin with that? How do we shift from customer satisfaction onto catechesis, where we're not just trying to entertain or to keep people involved, but actually go to the truths of our faith?
I think it's a matter of moving beyond this sense of giving the young people what they want to hear and challenging them in terms of what they need to hear. But to get there, I think it begins with us hearing and doing some really true listening. So oftentimes we make quick assumptions or do quick triage, and that's not really a good way to get to the heart of what the young person needs. So I think listening is key.
I would definitely agree with that. Ella?
I think one of the things that I always like to start with is that re-embracement of what we see in all of our documents that say quite early on, catechesis was the totality of the church's efforts to make disciples. And so we embrace that concept of disciple making, and not just information giving or that kind of I really love what you said, Adam, about customer satisfaction. Trying to give what only meeting people's perceived needs, but really reaching deep down into those unperceived needs of speaking to the heart, engaging and equipping young people and adults and parents to really share faith with others, and taking catechesis out of just the responsibility of a handful of people, but really asking the whole church to look at all the opportunities that we have to share faith with our young people and to speak that word of Christ to them.
Thank you. I think part of it is just that tension between what we know to be the truths, the foundations of our faith, and imparting that in the relationship that we have with young people. It's probably one of the challenges for me as a youth minister as well. Pam, what challenges you most about what you heard from Bob Rice of the chapter? One of the things that I was thinking is number 114 says, the church must be a place of mercy freely given, where everyone can feel welcomed, loved, forgiven, encouraged to live the good life of the gospel. And any person who works with youth would agree with this, but the challenge for me sometimes is to translate this into the language of young people, of the cultures that may be different from my own experiences. What would be the challenge that you see in this chapter? And how about Frank on this one?
I would say that the most challenging of the document was paragraph 120, where all the baptized, whatever their position in the church or their level of instruction in the faith, are agents of evangelization. And it would be insufficient to envisage a plan of evangelization to be carried out by professionals while the rest of the faithful would simply be passive recipients. The new evangelization calls for personal involvement on the part of each of the baptized. I find that challenging because I think as Catholics we get like a sacramental spirituality. We kind of grow up with a whole sense of what it means to be Catholic is Eucharist and reconciliation. So those are just a part of who we are, just like as an Italian, food is a part of our culture. But I think that the whole call to share your faith as a daily expression of your spirituality is not something I think inherent in most Catholics' experience of growing up Catholic. And so I think that we have a particular vantage point, being that we work with young people. We have really an opportunity to really turn this around. In order to do that, I think we got to be a model of evangelization. They have to see it, not only that we're expressing it within the context of youth ministry, but they see that we're living it in all of our all of life. When you get on a plane, when you're with your neighbors, and so forth. So we got to model it. I think we also have to help them develop a deep and vibrant and real relationship with Jesus. I think that's a primary impulse of sharing your faith. I think we could do a lot better in terms of developing activities, events, and gatherings that are evangelistic in our parishes, where they could bring people to help on a communal level express the good news. And I think we could do a better job probably giving them tools and resources and even accountability. But I think that's the challenge. We have a particular vantage point because we work with young people, and maybe this next generation could be the last generation of Catholics that do not have a evangelistic spirituality.
Thank you. You should write a book. How about Robbie? What are the challenges that you see from this chapter?
Well, I really believe strongly that the missionary disciples, accompanying missionary disciples, is important, and I think it's not really as easy as it sounds. First, I think if we're going to try to increase the force of missionary disciples, that we need to have the information, but to also realize that information is a tool. It's not the end. It's the means to the end. And speaking to the heart is where we're going to train missionary disciples to help accompany other missionary disciples. So we need to find out what it is about them. Each person has a different charism, and I think it's so important to recognize that and to appreciate it and to respect it. What I don't have, someone else might have, and they may be able to accompany another disciple that I would never be able to accompany because I'm not capable of those same charisms. And we really need to appreciate all the gifts and talents that everyone has. And to that end, I feel that that's the challenge. I think that we can reach only so many people ourselves, of course, and we hope that they reach others. But then we reach that circle of engagement and wonder how we go from the engaged to the unengaged. And so I think that needs more conversation. We're not going to be able to do that for everyone, but these missionary disciples need to maybe have some tools and confidence building tools actually that will enable them to reach out to people that maybe they didn't think about.
Thank you very much. Joe, you have a question from the chat room.
There's a few questions. Before I get there, I just want to point out there's a lot of wisdom here too. So Mike Sievers had mentioned, kind of in contrast to the question, he said, I love how Pope Francis hones in the key component of our faith. God loves us. If we aren't communicating that, then all of our efforts are weakened. And then there's several people kind of said very similar things on that too. So I think a lot of it comes down to are we exemplifying and living this out ourselves. So, but yes, a question from Hope was that she feels like she's dragging anything out of the kids. She's just having to pull out any answers. So, how do we cut through that apathy? How do we help them move from being kind of just being here because parents are forcing me and dropping me off, to having the desire of wanting to be here, wanting to live this out, and wanting to participate fully?
It's a great question, Hope. Thanks so much for that. Certainly a challenge of any youth ministry is how do we reach them with the joy of the gospel, how our faith, our Catholic beliefs have really made a difference in our lives, and meet them where they are, whether or not they're apathetic or listless or whatever adjectives we want to use. Pat, do you want to tackle that one? You might want to start again with your mic.
Okay. Oh, you missed a great joke. I said regarding apathy, I really don't care, but no. I'm mindful of an encounter I had with a young person way back in the day. Her name was Shannon, and she walked into our youth ministry that night. It happened to be a mandatory confirmation class. Hate to use those phrases, but and she looked at me and she said, "Okay, Pat, what do we got to do tonight?" And somehow the Spirit, just without missing a beat, just inspired me to say, "No, Shannon, it's what we get to do tonight." And some of it is, I mean, that's simple wordplay, I realize, and nuancing. But what I realized at that time is sort of affirmed by what Francis says, and this was a challenge that I found in The Joy of the Gospel, where he talks about moving in paragraph 170, moving beyond a sort of therapy supporting their self-absorption, and taking it to that level of being a pilgrimage with Christ to the Father. It's, as Robbie said earlier, it's not easy by any stretch, and we all know that, or we wouldn't be tuned into this. But I really find these days, and as I mentioned in my opening comments, a concern within me about the blessings and curses of technology. Obviously, technology is a blessing to us. This session being an example. But yeah, even with youth ministry, it's gone beyond, as I see it sometimes, a been there, done that, got the T-shirt experience, which is a phrase I used to throw out back in the day, to a been there, done that, took the selfie and posted it to Instagram experience. And I think the challenge is to not overreact, but just to slow things down, reach deep inside, encounter the person as they are, and then slowly but surely move from me to we. That to me is the challenge of Catholicism. I loosely identify it as it's bigger than me. It's a experience, especially as we look at situations that are really out there in the world, like what's going on in Baltimore, what's going on in Nepal, what's going on with Pope Francis's upcoming encyclical on the climate. These are not things that any one individual can solve, nor are they anything that, got to admit it, that we as a single church can solve. We've got to constantly be about the Catholic business of building, of reaching out, casting our nets wider. And I think if we engage the young people in the reality of that, we'll gain credibility. Hope that helped.
Definitely. I like the joke too.
Thanks.
And I also have a drawer full of T-shirts. Selfies.
I don't do selfies.
How about Frank? Frank?
I would say that maybe one of the best ways to break through apathy is really to invest in relationships. I think, as opposed to simply approach it from a content, cognitive perspective, but to really get involved in young people's lives, ask them how you could pray for them. Ask them, know what's going on in their life, and develop a whole team of adults who are highly invested in young people's lives. I think breaks through what might appear to be apathy. Sometimes it's, when young people feel like I have to be here, you got a developmental collision you got to break through too. Oftentimes, when we're doing ministry in the context of confirmation in high school, their developmental collision is that they're trying to be autonomous and having to be there, maybe not something they chose to do, maybe not something they don't want to do, but because they didn't choose it, somehow you got to break through that developmental collision. And sometimes by identifying with young people, like, yeah, I remember when I've had to do things like this too, when I didn't necessarily want to be here. Sometimes just that identifying helps break through. But I think that I think really one of the keys is to build a community that becomes our best evangelistic apologetic, in a sense that our community is so loving, so caring, that we actually live our identity of John 13:35, that you'll know my disciples by their love for one another. I think in fleshing that, making it more than just a propositional statement. And community is in the very DNA of Catholicism, and yet when we often refer to community, we're only talking about a group of people gathering. I think that we have to start to look at the epistles where Paul was describing a real, authentic community that was highly invested in one another's lives. And I think that community is a dominant hunger of young people. And if we start building that and becoming architects of authentic Christian community, I think it's going to speak to young people, because affiliated faith, I think, is a dominant form of faith. So they want to be a part of something, they want to belong to us, somewhere. And by doing that well, I think we'll evangelize well.
I totally agree. That kind of community is infectious and draws people to it, and including young people. That's exactly what they yearn for. Ella?
I want to kind of build on what Frank said, because I think, for me, this also is this idea of investing in those who minister with our young people. in Pope Francis's document in 121, he talks about people wanting to feel like they're better trained, have a deeper love, to be able to have a clearer wisdom before they can minister. And he says we ought to be to let others be constantly evangelizing to us, which I think is that idea of humbling ourselves to learn and to grow. But we often look at those who are engaged with us in youth ministry, our adult team members, our catechists. We often talk about how they help us with youth ministry. And I think the reality is that we need to look at them as collaborators and invest with them in the energy, the time, and the confidence for them to really be able to build those relationships that Frank talked about, to really walk in faith with young people and to feel confident and to feel called to do that. And that really just changes that whole culture that moves, that weird separation that we often do between evangelization and catechesis to a catechesis that evangelizes because of the relationship and the Christ that we're showing through catechesis.
Thanks, Ella. And also part of 121, it says our mission is a constant stimulus not to remain mired in mediocrity, but to continue growing as youth ministers, and that will be an example to young people as well. Robbie, you had a comment about this as well?
Yeah, I believe that what Ella is referring to is to smell like the sheep. And that's another question we can ask. Are we smelling like the sheep still? And I also like what Bob Royce had to say about love them where they are, but too much to keep them there. And so if we're really smelling like the sheep, we're with them, and really putting 110% of ourselves. And I think everybody tries to do that, but we all there's this balance between balance and love, and so somehow either we need more people who are willing to help smell like sheep, or we'll have to find a balance where we can still love people without killing ourselves. There's a woman, I did a small mission project this weekend in Hopkins Park, Illinois, and Sister Mary Clemens is somebody who I really thought smelled like the sheep. I mean, this woman lived in a convent there with a roof that's breaking down. She knows all of the people in town. She knows exactly what their problems are, and they know her. They stop by her house and visit with her, have a cookie over tea. She knows all their needs, and I look for people that really smell like the sheep and look at what's happening around them, and it's always good stuff, always.
Thank you. It sounds like we're just hitting into that theme of accompaniment, and before we do that, Joe, would you give us an update on the group chat?
Yeah, the chat's actually going really quickly right now. A lot of great things. It's hard to keep up with everything, to be honest. Earlier, one thing with the last question, Kim had shared that she thinks it's what we interpret as apathy. It's really more about not knowing, that it's really that the youth just don't know how to articulate what they're thinking. A lot of people are sharing, though, how they appreciate a lot of what Bob has said, pointing out too many quotes for me to even share. But a lot of question is, okay, how do we keep evangelization within youth ministry? How do we evangelize while also being catechetical? How do we evangelize while also sharing the beauty of the larger and the universal church? Right now, that's where a lot of the conversation seems to be going.
Okay, thanks so much. Does anybody want to address any one of those?
I always want to kind of pull into, what's an example of catechesis that's evangelizing? And I think about that when we actually do catechesis, we always evangelize. Evangelization starts before and flows through and flows around catechesis. And the way we do that is we tie the gospel to their hungers of their lives and to the experience of their lives. But we also have that gospel and those the message of Christ reflect back to how their lives can change So we start with experience, we have infusion of the gospel into that, and we change experience from that. That catechesis that evangelizes does that. It also is how the catechist approaches what they do. When they see themselves as witness, as sharing the message and concretizing it with their own life, you know, how it has changed their lives. It is so easy to talk about content, but when we change and say, this is what transubstantiation means to me, this is how, here's the teaching, but here's how it affected my life, here's how it changes my life.
Thank you. Robbie?
There we are. Yes. I actually, that was another quote that I love, and I actually focused on it after Easter both this year and last, but it's, they knew him in the breaking of the bread. And so the question is, do they recognize us in the breaking of our lives? Do they recognize Jesus in the breaking of our lives open? I think that this is a message that is a transformation, though, for the entire parish, not just for youth ministry or one minister, that we've already seen that young people, their faith experience is from what they actually experienced, not from what they heard. So if we tell them something, even if we model something, and they don't see it modeled in the Christian community, it's not going to hold a lot of water for them. So I think the work that we have to do is much more widespread than just from us to the teens we minister to, but encouraging parishes to do some transformation. I think this is the time for it. I really think that there's a lot of consultation going on about it that's open and available to people, and Pope Francis is behind this change in the church, and we need to jump on that while it's still there.
I agree. Pat, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I was looking through last night, reminding myself of what Pope Francis says in paragraph 130, that the charisms of the church are meant for all. And to get back to that question of how does catechesis evangelize, I think it's important to evangelize young people, as I think Pope Francis is trying to do, to a very broad global church with many gifts, and reminding us that there are many gifts in the same spirit, and many parts to one body. I think sometimes, again, we lose sight of that, and I noticed there was another comment along the chat that we're seeing about sometimes our parishes can be somewhat monocultural. Not only that, but sometimes the conversations can become somewhat redundant and get into a rut. And I think we're called to draw people to that global sense of the church. Mindful of a class that I'm teaching online right now with the University of Dayton on Catholic social teaching, and just how many of the adults, people my age and older, are not really aware of the stories of Cesar Chavez, for instance, and just these are things with technology that we can bring live into the young people. We don't need to, ideally we can go out, but we have more ability than ever in our catechesis to draw the world into the four walls of our church or our youth room.
Thanks, Pat. Pat was referencing a chat room response from Mark Mann, where he says in paragraph 117, we would not do justice to the logic of the incarnation if we thought Christianity was monocultural. And then Mark says, can the panel share how they assist young people in discovering the diversity with the unity of the church, especially in parishes that are monocultural themselves? Anybody else on the panel want to cover that? Okay. How about
oops.
Go ahead. Pat?
Okay, yeah, if I may, another aspect of this class, and I think that I'm teaching online right now, which I think is important, is the Black Catholic experience. And what emerged in this conversation among adults, which again I think is easily replicable among young people, is that a lot of people aren't aware of the that emerges from the sense of being overlooked. This is something that I think in various ways young people can readily identify with, regardless of their race. And this is by no means trying to tone down or dismiss racial oppression or the like. But I was amazed at how readily for instance, some of the Hispanic learners in this class were able to say, okay, I'm not black, but I get it. It's children of the leaders. That's something, again, if this is making sense, that we can lift up using some technology, bringing also some of the pastoral letters from our bishops into the room and animating those, that we can express to young people that this church is way bigger than us, than our monocultural sense, be it racially or just as millennials.
Thank you. Sorry about that technical difficulty there. Ella?
I also like the idea of doing catechesis when we talk about Mary and looking at the role of Mary in the church. Mary in our church is the way variety of cultures present Mary in imagery, and how they hold her in such reverence in around the world is a great way to help a monocultural young people, in a church that has mostly one culture, to really see the diversity of the experience of our church. Just the different iconographies and images are just so powerful and speak so much to people's experiences of faith, and I think that's a great way to introduce things.
Thank you. Maybe we could end this part, anyway, of the panel on how is the information from the chapter going to affect you or help you foster in others an encounter with Jesus? And do you want to include some thoughts about what Bob Rice said about heralding and accompanying others in faith? That would be great. Again, how is the information from the chapter going to affect you, influence you, help you foster in others an encounter with Jesus?
For me, I think it's twofold. I think I'm feeling very challenged to stop talking about where faith and culture and faith and life intersect, but really start looking and expressing it as how they are joined and how they're always joined together. Their intersection is they come together and then one goes in one direction and one goes the other, and there's just that moment of intersection. And I don't want that to happen. I want joining of faith. And when you look at when he's talking about the gospel, the homilies, and this idea of synthesis, I think that's where I feel called to.
Thank you, Ella. Frank?
Maybe an important nuance, maybe to consider as we try to accompany young people, is that I think those of us who are older, maybe millennial or Gen Xers, Boomers, I think for us, we wanted people to accept us for who we are. But I think young people today, it's accept me for who I am not. They don't want a relationship that has an agenda. I don't think they want us to move into getting to know them so that we could evangelize them. I think we have to, in a very natural and authentic way, simply embody the gospel. And of course, being authentic, we would share the good news of the gospel with young people. But I don't think we want to use our relationship as a strategy of influence. or we're trying to accomplish something bigger. Even though we know that we want them to have a relationship with God and to truly love them, we want to share that. But young people today don't like when we put missions in front of relationships. And I just think it's an important nuance that we got to be intentional, certainly, but we got to just intentionally love in an authentic manner.
Thank you. Thank you. Pat?
One of the takeaways from me is from paragraph 127, where Francis says that being a disciple means constantly being ready to bring the love of Jesus to others. And what that challenged me, it reminded me of people who are they're ready to go at a moment's notice to take on the challenges. I think sometimes I find myself in a certain complacency, and I feel Francis calling me to be more ready to update my bag of tricks, if you will. I think we all could stand to do that. It goes back to some of the truisms of relational ministry, meeting people where they're at, listening to what they're listening to, being in social media, trying to be more aware of the so
I think there's a little difficulty with technology again. Let's go to Robbie.
Hi. I think I like that analogy that we're all in the same boat together. And I love boats. I've spent a lot of time racing boats and stuff like that. But one thing for sure is if you're in a boat together and one person is rowing at lightning speed and the person next to them is very much slower, that boat's going to go in a circle. And sometimes I feel like that's what I do, and I have to personally concentrate on listening. And I get so excited when I read, The Joy of the Gospel, Church of Mercy, go to a conference. I'm on fire, and I come back, and it's like an explosion. So I have to learn to have a few friends maybe that I can get that explosion out to, but really listen and see where people are at before I start rowing my boat too fast on one side.
What a great analogy. Thank you. We're just about at the end of this session, but I'd like to get an update from Joe about the chat rooms.
Yeah, a lot of great final comments from everyone that I want to share. Earlier in the chat, someone had mentioned how we do kind of a great job in evangelization with RCIA and how we need to keep that going. Brian made a comment earlier though how he keeps thinking a key theme is joy. How there's joy in evangelization, communities where youth see joyful adults they want to be walking with. And catechesis is in which we share how we live, what we believe brings joy to life. And then even follow up, he goes, I only want to hang out with the people that are joyful, as an adult, whether they're in the church or not. So we need to make sure that we're sharing that joy. And then Sherry had mentioned how one of her practical things, and a few people latched onto this, is how they start by providing food for their kids, not just snacks, but complete meals. And she made the comment how a lot of her young people are from low-income families, sometimes coming to their gatherings. That's their one full meal they get for that day. And she's from, she said, because they're in Hawaii, they're not monocultural, they're multicultural. Personally, I think I need to go witness it firsthand, being in Hawaii. Finally, Kathy said, maybe evangelizing catechesis looks like welcome, prayer, listening, variety, experience, and challenging discussion, among other things. So we incorporate that. And the last thing seems to be the key word is authenticity and authentic. And so there's kind of a challenge of we need to make sure that we're authentic as we share our own faith and live it out.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks so much for the people in the learning communities and those that shared on the chats. I certainly benefited from them. Also benefited from our awesome panel, Robbie and Pat and Frank and Ella. Thank you very much for being with us. And Thanks so much, Joe, for facilitating those chats. Before we leave today, we'd like to thank the National Association of Catholic Youth Ministry Leaders, or NACYML, for their planning and organizing this MOOC. NACYML is an organization that is a member-driven organization for those in the field of Catholic youth ministry. It provides opportunities like this at the table of discussions with the NFCYM, and provides additional resources and discounts for ministerial speakers and content. Anyone may join and support this great organization by going to www.nacyml.org or by clicking the link on the left-hand side in the classroom under MOOC resources. And again, thanks so much for all of you, and we'll see you next week.